When we speak about delay, we often speak from a place of emotion rather than understanding. The human heart is wired for immediacy. We want answers quickly, relief instantly, and clarity now. So when something we ask Allah for does not arrive on our timeline, the mind quietly begins to ask dangerous questions. Did Allah hear me? Did I do something wrong? Am I being ignored? Yet this way of thinking assumes that divine wisdom should operate according to human impatience, and that is where the imbalance begins. Allah's delay is not absence, and it is certainly not neglect. It is intention, it is precision. Just as a surgeon does not rush an operation simply because the patient is uncomfortable, Allah does not rush outcomes simply because we are restless. He sees the entire picture while we only see the moment we are standing in. What looks like a closed door may actually be a shield. What feels like stagnation may be protection in disguise. Many times, if Allah were to give us what we asked for immediately, it would harm us, weaken us, or even destroy us. Psychologically, delay exposes our relationship with control. We like to believe we know what is best, not only for ourselves, but even for our future. Yet every life experience eventually teaches us the same lesson. Timing changes everything. The same opportunity received too early can overwhelm us, inflate the ego, or collapse under pressure. Received too late, it may lose its value. Allah's wisdom ensures that what arrives does so at a time when it can be carried, sustained, and appreciated. Consider how often, with hindsight, you have thanked Allah for something you once desperately wanted, but never received. At the time it felt like deprivation, later it revealed itself as mercy. This is not coincidence, this is pattern. Delay is Allah training the believer to trust beyond sight, to rely beyond logic, and to submit beyond emotion. It shifts faith from being outcome-based to being principle-based. Philosophically, delay forces us to confront a deeper truth. Our worth is not measured by how quickly our prayers are answered. If every dua were answered instantly, patience would lose meaning, reliance would become unnecessary, and sincerity would weaken. Waiting filters intention. It separates those who worship Allah for results from those who worship Him for who He is. And Allah, in His wisdom, purifies hearts before He grants hands what they are asking for. There is also a subtle mercy in delay that many overlook. While we wait, Allah continues to give. He gives strength to endure, clarity to reflect, and often opportunities to grow in ways we never asked for. The delay itself becomes a form of divine conversation. Allah is shaping perspective, adjusting priorities, and aligning circumstances quietly, perfectly, without announcing it. So when the answer does not come, resist the urge to interpret delay as rejection. Instead, ask a better question. What is Allah teaching me right now? What is being protected? What is being prepared? This shift in thinking transforms frustration into reflection and anxiety into trust. The believer who understands this no longer measures faith by speed, but by certainty, because in the end, delay does not mean Allah said no. It often means Allah is saying, not yet, and when it comes, you will understand why. One of the most misunderstood aspects of DU Letter 2, BFA Macron, is the assumption that an answer must look exactly like what we asked for, delivered in the time frame we expect. When that does not happen, the heart quietly concludes that nothing has occurred at all. But this assumption rests on a very narrow definition of response. In reality, Allah responds in ways far more expansive than the human imagination allows. Every sincere DU Letter 2 BFA Macron is answered, but not every answer arrives in the same form. When Allah delays, He is still responding. Sometimes the response is subtle, unfolding quietly in the background of your life. A door you wanted remains closed, but in that closure you are protected from harm you never saw coming. A path you thought was perfect suddenly collapses, forcing you toward a direction you never planned, yet later realize it shaped you in ways success never could. These are not coincidences, they are responses that do not announce themselves. Psychologically, we struggle with this because we equate response with reward. We expect Allah's reply to confirm our desires rather than refine them. Yet divine wisdom often operates by subtraction before addition. Something is removed so that something greater can eventually take its place. This is difficult for the ego because it demands trust without immediate evidence. But faith was never meant to be a transaction where we insert a prayer and immediately receive a product. It is a relationship built on certainty in Allah's knowledge, not our preference. There are moments when Allah responds by delaying to redirect. You ask for one thing, believing it to be the source of peace, but Allah guides you away from it because it would have tethered your happiness to something fragile. Instead, He leads you toward growth, resilience, and inner stability. You may not recognize this as an answer at the time, but later when you look back, the redirection becomes clearer than the original request ever was. At other times, the response is internal rather than external. You ask for relief, and circumstances remain unchanged, but suddenly your heart is stronger. You endure what once felt unbearable, you gain patience you did not know you possessed. This too is a response. In fact, it is often the most profound one. Allah may not change the situation immediately, but He changes you within it, and that transformation carries a value far beyond temporary comfort. Philosophically, this challenges our understanding of divine generosity. We assume that generosity means giving exactly what is asked for. But true generosity sometimes lies in withholding, delaying, or replacing. Because the giver sees consequences the receiver cannot. Allah's response is always aligned with mercy, even when it does not feel that way in the moment. The believer is invited to trust not only Allah's power, but His judgment. This is why the silence between asking and receiving should never be interpreted as emptiness. It is filled with unseen activity. Allah is rearranging events, softening hearts, opening alternatives, and closing dangers, all while the believer waits. The delay is not passive, it is purposeful, and when the answer finally becomes visible, it often arrives with a depth and wisdom that makes the waiting make sense. So instead of asking, "Why hasn't Allah answered me?" ask, "In what way is Allah answering me right now?" This shift transforms frustration into awareness and despair into hope. When you understand that every delay is still a response, you stop measuring Allah's care by speed and start recognizing it by wisdom. Because Allah never leaves a sincere DU letter to BFA Macron unanswered, He only answers it in the way that is best, not the way that is fastest. One of the greatest misconceptions about waiting is the belief that nothing is happening while we wait. We measure progress only by visible change, by external movement, by results we can point to and say, "This is it." But in the spiritual life, the most important work often takes place quietly, internally, and unseen. The waiting period is not empty time, it is formative time. It is where Allah shapes the believer in ways that comfort alone never could. Psychologically, waiting strips away illusions of control. When outcomes are delayed, we are forced to confront how deeply we rely on our own plans and timelines. This discomfort is not accidental. It teaches the heart to shift from self-reliance to reliance on Allah. In the absence of immediate answers, sincerity deepens. DU letter 2 BFA Macron becomes less about demanding outcomes and more about seeking closeness. Over time, patience stops being a forced behavior and becomes a settled state of the heart. There is also a quiet maturity that develops during prolonged waiting. A person who has waited with faith does not react the same way as someone who has never had to wait. They are less shaken by uncertainty, less desperate for validation, and more grounded in purpose. Allah uses delay to refine emotional strength, to teach restraint where impulsiveness once ruled, and to replace panic with trust. These changes are subtle, but they are permanent. Philosophically, growth in waiting challenges our obsession with speed. Modern life teaches us that faster is better, that success should be immediate, and that delays indicate failure. Islam offers a different lens. It teaches that slowness, when guided by wisdom, produces depth. Just as muscles grow through resistance, faith grows through endurance. Without waiting, concepts like patience, gratitude, and reliance remain theoretical. Delay turns them into lived realities. Consider how many people receive what they want quickly, only to lose themselves in the process. Wealth arrives before character is ready. Recognition comes before humility is formed. Ease settles in before gratitude is learned. Allah, in His mercy, delays so that blessings do not become burdens. He prepares the container before pouring what it is meant to hold, and that preparation often hurts, not because it is harmful, but because growth is rarely comfortable. During the waiting period, Allah also exposes what truly matters. When you are stripped of distractions, unanswered BFA Macron forces reflection. Why do I want this? What am I attaching my peace to? Where does my sense of worth come from? These questions, though unsettling, realign priorities. Many people come out of waiting with clearer values, stronger boundaries, and a deeper understanding of themselves and their relationship with Allah. It is also in waiting that faith becomes independent of outcomes. The believer learns to worship Allah not because prayers are answered quickly, but because Allah is worthy of worship regardless. This is a higher level of Iman, one that is not shaken by delay or silence. When faith reaches this point, the heart finds peace even before circumstances change. So when you are waiting, do not ask what you are losing. Ask what you are becoming. Pay attention to the patience being built, the clarity being formed, and the strength being planted quietly within you. Because when the answer finally comes, it is not only the situation that will be different, you will be different too. And that is why the waiting was never wasted. It was preparing you for what you could not yet carry. There comes a point in the journey of faith where delay is no longer about what we are asking for, but about who we are becoming in the act of asking. Allah, in His wisdom, often tests trust before granting blessings, not because He needs proof of our faith, but because we need to discover the quality of our own reliance. Delay exposes whether our connection with Allah is conditional, tied to outcomes, or rooted in conviction, regardless of what unfolds. Psychologically, trust is easiest when results are immediate. When prayers are answered quickly, the heart feels reassured and confident. But when nothing changes for a long time, the inner dialogue begins. Doubt whispers, frustration grows, and impatience tests sincerity. This is where faith either matures or weakens. Allah allows this space not to push us away, but to pull us closer, to invite a deeper form of reliance that is not dependent on visible progress. Philosophically, this challenges the transactional mindset many unknowingly develop in worship. We pray, we obey, we give, and somewhere in the heart there is an expectation of immediate return. Yet Allah never promised speed, He promised wisdom. Trust is not proven when things work out easily, but when obedience continues even when outcomes are delayed. This is why the greatest acts of faith are often invisible, silent patience, consistent prayer, and hope maintained in the absence of reassurance. Allah tests trust because trust itself is a prerequisite for safely receiving blessings. A heart that collapses in delay may not be ready to carry what it is asking for. Blessings amplify what already exists within a person. If there is gratitude, blessings increase humility. If there is entitlement, blessings increase arrogance. Delay allows Allah to purify intention, to remove dependence on the gift, and replace it with dependence on the giver. There is also a profound emotional shift that occurs when trust is tested and sustained. The believer begins to release the illusion of control. Anxiety softens because the heart understands that outcomes are not being managed by chance, but by Allah. Even uncertainty becomes bearable when it is framed as part of divine care. This does not mean the believer stops striving or stops making BFA Macron, but that effort is now accompanied by calm rather than desperation. Often, people assume that trust means passivity, but true trust is active. It is continuing to do what is right, continuing to pray, continuing to hope, even when nothing changes externally. Allah observes this consistency. He sees the believer who shows up in prayer with the same sincerity on difficult days as on easy ones. That consistency is not unnoticed, and it is never unrewarded. In moments of delay, Allah is asking a quiet but powerful question. If I do not give you what you want right now, will you still trust me? Will you still turn to me? Will you still believe that I know what you do not? The answer to that question shapes the soul more than the blessing itself ever could. So when you find yourself waiting, do not see it as a sign of distance. See it as an invitation to deepen trust. Hold firmly to what you know about Allah, even when you do not understand what He is doing. Because the heart that learns to trust Allah without conditions is the heart that is truly ready to receive, whenever the answer comes. One of the most liberating truths a believer can internalize is the understanding that what is written for you will never miss you. This principle reshapes how we interpret delay, loss, and even disappointment. Much of human anxiety is rooted in the fear that something meant for us is slipping away, that if we do not push hard enough, move fast enough, or hold on tightly enough, we will lose our chance. Islam offers a radically calming alternative. What Allah has decreed for you is already secured. Psychologically, this belief dismantles the constant tension of comparison and urgency. We look at others moving ahead, achieving milestones, receiving blessings we are still waiting for, and the heart begins to panic. We assume timelines define worth, but when you truly understand that no one can take what Allah has written for you, envy loses its grip. Competition softens. The pressure to rush life dissolves into patience. Delay, then, is no longer interpreted as failure, but as alignment. Allah is not late, He is precise. If something has not arrived, it is not because you were slow, undeserving, or forgotten. It is because the appointed moment has not yet come. This does not negate effort. Islam never teaches passivity, but it reframes effort as obedience rather than anxiety. You strive because it is right to strive, not because you fear missing out on what was never yours to begin with. Philosophically, this truth confronts our attachment to control. Humans like to believe that outcomes are solely the result of strategy and effort. While effort matters, it is not ultimate. Allah's decree operates beyond human planning. Sometimes we chase what is not written for us with exhaustion and heartbreak, while what is written approaches us quietly, without struggle. Recognizing this shifts the believer from obsession to acceptance. This understanding also heals the pain of things that leave us. Relationships end, opportunities vanish, doors close abruptly. Without this belief, the heart is tormented by what-ifs. But with it, the believer can say with certainty, if it left, it was never meant to stay, and if it was meant to stay, no force could have removed it. This does not erase grief, but it gives grief meaning and direction, preventing it from turning into bitterness. There is a subtle confidence that grows in a heart anchored in this truth. You begin to move through life with dignity rather than desperation. You make DU letter to BFA Macron with hope, not fear. You accept outcomes without feeling personally diminished. You understand that Allah's plan is not a reaction to your mistakes, but a design built on knowledge far beyond your vision. When delay is viewed through this lens, patience becomes easier. You stop measuring life by what is missing and start appreciating what is unfolding. You realize that Allah's timing is not competing with yours, it is correcting it. The believer who understands this no longer rushes blessings or clings to losses. They walk forward trusting that what lies ahead is intentionally placed there. So let go of the fear that you are falling behind. Let go of the anxiety that someone else has taken your place. What Allah has written for you is moving toward you at the exact speed it is meant to. And when it arrives, you will realize it never could have come a moment earlier. There is a perspective that completely transforms how a believer understands unanswered DU letter to BFA Macron, and it is the realization that some of Allah's greatest gifts are intentionally delayed until hereafter. We often assume that the value of a prayer lies in seeing its result in this world, but this life was never meant to be the final place of compensation. It is a place of testing, striving, and trusting, while the true accounting is reserved for a day when nothing is lost and nothing is overlooked. Psychologically, this idea is difficult because human beings are wired for immediate feedback. We want closure, resolution, and visible results. When those do not come, the mind interprets it as loss, but Allah invites the believer to think beyond the limits of a single lifetime. A DU letter to BFA Macron unanswered here is not a DU letter to BFA Macron wasted. It may be a DU letter to BFA Macron preserved, protected, and multiplied for a moment when its value will far exceed anything this world could offer. There are prayers that, if answered exactly as asked, would bring comfort for a few years at most, but when stored for the hereafter, they become a source of eternal reward. Imagine standing on the day of judgment and seeing mountains of reward placed before you, only to be told that these came from prayers you once thought were ignored. At that moment, regret will not be over unanswered DU letter to BFA Macron, but over the ones that were answered too quickly in this world. Philosophically, this reframes the concept of success. If this life is temporary, then receiving everything here would actually be a loss. Allah, in His mercy, does not allow all rewards to be spent in a place that is fleeting. Sometimes He withholds not because He is displeased, but because He is generous. He chooses to reward you where the reward will never expire. This understanding also protects the believer from despair. When hardship continues and relief seems distant, faith anchored only to worldly change becomes fragile. But faith anchored to the hereafter remains steady. The believer realizes that every moment of patience, every unanswered DU letter to BFA Macron, every tear shed in sincerity is being recorded with precision. Nothing is wasted, nothing is overlooked. Even the pain that made no sense in this life will make perfect sense in the next. There is also a powerful emotional balance created by this belief. The believer continues to ask Allah for ease, healing, and success, but their heart is no longer crushed if those things are delayed. Hope remains alive without turning into entitlement. Gratitude remains intact even in hardship. The heart understands that Allah is choosing the best form of reward, not the quickest one. This perspective elevates patience from endurance to confidence. You are no longer merely surviving difficulty, you are investing in eternity. Every DU letter to BFA Macron becomes meaningful regardless of outcome. Every delay becomes an opportunity for reward. And every moment of trust becomes an act of worship. So when you raise your hands and the answer does not arrive in the way you expected, do not lower your hands in disappointment. Raise your certainty instead. Trust that Allah may be saving your prayer for a day when you will need it more than you ever imagined. Because a DU letter to BFA Macron stored by Allah is never lost, it is simply waiting for the moment it will matter forever.